My name is Carlos Pacheco, and welcome to the first Anatomy of a Strategy podcast. We are recorded in downtown Toronto, where 2 centimeters of snow means nobody shows up for work and the city calls in the troops.
It's so true. My name is Tara Hunt, founder and all-round rabble-rouser at Truly. I like to rant about, well, pretty much just about everything. But in particular, and on this podcast, I will be ranting a lot about getting strategic about your marketing. Welcome to the first of this one, but 10th podcast.
Actually, no, you got it wrong. It's 11th podcast.
Oh.
It's actually the 11th podcast.
Oh.
It's hard to keep track of all these numbers.
It is hard to keep track of numbers, especially since it's been a long while since we did this. And it has been a long while for multiple reasons.
Yes.
Last time we got on this podcast, we talked about branding and it being an evolution. Well, we're still evolving.
Yes.
And I think that was like one of the big pieces that was holding us back because we renamed the
agency.
Yeah, the company, but we haven't spent as much time. I mean, we're still doing the same thing as we always did, but we haven't spent as much time just like doing the look and feel, and everything just kept being pushed out because, well, we've had a lot of really very exciting projects come on board since we last talked.
Yes.
We just launched a huge project with Nokia, Future Rhythmic. Which was we put a lot of heart and soul into it. And we're really proud of that. But that's not what this is about. We did also wanted to rename the podcast.
Yep. And that was a little bit of a back and forth and trying to figure it out, the right name, and try to take a name that it's not already out there and something that means something to us.
Maybe we should talk a little bit about naming today after this. But, naming is an interesting business. And it's a thing a lot of people, I think, get caught up on. I guess we can talk a little bit about it because we were trying to name this, and then we were also trying to name Future Rhythmic, which has I think, a really interesting story behind it. But I have come into naming conundrums many times over the years, and I always found that I'm much better at naming other people's things than I am my own. I think that's sort of a common thread.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's harder when you have to commit it to yourself.
Yeah, you're so close to it and it doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time thinking about what we were going to call it, and I can't remember where this came from exactly.
Oh, we had a bunch of names, and this one popped up because it aligns more about, the way we think, right?
Yeah, so I have a little fun factoid.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if it's a factoid or not, but it's one of the questions that I was asking the other day, because I've been doing a lot of writing and did a couple of videos, and we'll be doing more videos on why it's so important to have a strategy and not just tactics. And so I was like, I wonder how many tactics and channels there are out there, right? Because if you think about yourself if you were, a marketing professional in 1980 compared to now, like, what are you facing? And so I did a lot of Googling, and I mean, there's a bunch of different lists out there, but I think the biggest one that I found was 159 types of marketing that are available.
Just online, or is that general?
No, this is across various different channels, right? There's actually a list that you can buy on one site that has 36 channels, and then under that there are like
sub-channels,
like dozens of tactics under each channel, and then types as well, and so they also list like approaches, so you can kind of mix and match. So I don't know if that means there's like an infinite number of tactics, because you have channels, you have tactics, and then you have approaches to those tactics, right? So you it's like, do you approach it with a acquisition, focusing on acquisition, or do you focus on like brand building, like all those sort of pieces? So maybe there's like an infinite number of tactics and channels that are out there that you have to choose from. Whereas if you go back in time, I got really curious, and I just started researching, like, that's the history of marketing channels. Here's some interesting facts for you, and these are facts. So the earliest recorded use of spam, and this was over the telegraph, by the way,
That's
was
hilarious.
1864. Amazing, right?
Yeah.
So 1864, spammers were already using various different marketing channels. This one was the telegraph. And then it was 1922 radio advertising, which was one of sort of the early advertising media. Like they had billboards and paper, of course, before then, but this was like the first sort of multimedia one. So 1922 is radio advertising. And then the first recorded use of television advertising was in 1941. And then, of course, our favorite, telemarketing. Gotta love the telemarketers. I'd never answer my phone anymore, thanks to this advent. 1950s is when telemarketing came out. But if you were in the early 1980s and you were in marketing, the hot new form of marketing that emerged at that point was database marketing.
Whoa.
Pretty hot, right?
Yep.
So you got a contact list of people. So this is where you actually sent them, the snail mail, that sort of spam, I guess.
Direct mail. It's called direct mail.
Direct mail, right? Of course. Which is very funny. But then people also, there was the emergence of what's still called relationship marketing, which is a different approach to marketing where historically marketing was seen like kind of one-sided, and then it was all about, oh, hey, customers, we should probably listen to them too. Oh, and the emergence of computer-oriented spam, because spammers were way ahead of us already. They were waiting for the computer to come out. So even before most people had email.
So almost the spammers, you can almost compare spammers to the porn industry.
That's true. They probably did invent a lot of the marketing that we use today and think is pretty legitimate. So yeah, it was a lot simpler back then. I was trying to look up some of the early sort of books, the marketing books that influenced me in my early days. There was, of course, the idea of positioning. Positioning was a term that came out actually in the 1970s. As like, there's so many companies that sell the same thing. I mean, I don't have the stats on that, but I imagine it's exponential now. And so you need to position yourself uniquely in front of your audience. Anyways, it's all really fascinating. We will put some links in the show notes here. But needless to say, we are living in a time where there are just like endless channels, endless tactics, endless approaches. And then also companies who have the ability to go online and buy ads just by themselves, right? It used to have to, back in the 80s, even in the 90s, and even in like early 2000s, you would need to buy media through a media buying company.
Yep.
And then Facebook, I think
Google was sort of the first one.
Yeah, Google, and then Facebook.
One of them.
Yeah, so they launched the ability for companies to go online by themselves. But Google's wasn't simple. It still isn't. AdWords still isn't very simple. You still needed a bit of expertise. But Facebook, all of a sudden, you were posting a message to your page, and then there was like a little button that was like, why not sponsor this post to get in front of more people? And anybody with a credit card could do that. Yep. And the stat that Facebook has published is that there are over 6 million advertisers in North America on Facebook alone. Yep. So 6 million advertisers trying to reach an audience. Yep. So you compound all of the channels and the tactics and the approaches with the sheer number of businesses that are trying to reach the audience. And then, like, it just baffles me that people don't step back and try to think strategically. Like, how do you think you're going to cut through that noise if you don't have a strategy?
I sort of like lived that transition where I was buying certain types of medias, and then all of a sudden I was buying digital, and then all of a sudden I was buying search and then Facebook and stuff like that. And I still remember the transition. And I remember sort of like the gurus at the time we're sort of saying like, oh, the future is about specializing, and like you're going to be a Facebook marketer and you're going to be, an X marketer of this, right? And there might have been a time when that made sense, but I think we're at a point where that's past. What I think we're sort of forced to face here is that all these platforms are advertising to their clients, right? So you're on Instagram, all of a sudden like, oh, boost your Instagram post. It's click one button, you're done, right? So every brand out there thinks, oh, why do I need an agency? I'm just going to run these ads, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of our frustrations here where we've had examples of clients that, come to us and say we want a strategy, and then we start talking and we start explaining what our process is to build that strategy, and then they say like, you know what, we're gonna spend this
We're just gonna spend it on Facebook.
We're just
ads.
gonna run Facebook ads internally, and it's sort of like, okay, like that's a tactic.
Yeah.
Fine. What's going to happen and that tactic's going to exhaust itself very quickly.
Yeah.
We've had clients come back. We've had clients not come back. But at the same time, it's I think it's one of the fundamental reasons why we see this transition in the industry where, clients think they can bring the agency in-house because they think it's just these little tactics that they need to do internally, right? And they don't realize the strategy side of things. And we don't have the leverage that we used to have. I mean, agencies don't have the leverage that they used to have where, we'd put a bunch of clients together, we'd have a volume of a media buy, we'd talk to the TV station and say, hey, I have X amount of money at the end every year that I need to spend with your station. The station would give us a rate, and we'd have this awesome rate that we could share to all our clients.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work on the digital space. Although I do hear some rumors here and there that, Facebook and Google do give some preferential rates for big agencies. But, like, hey, that's a very small number of brands that can deal with those agencies.
Yeah, and I think you'd probably have to spend a lot on Facebook,
Yeah.
which I guess that's what Facebook wants to incentivize. And they're probably doing that now because they're, we see them in a decline. There's their earnings report might not show it yet, but between all of the privacy fiascos and just a general lack of, the younger generations really caring about Facebook. And I think the level of negative political discourse that's exhausting people. So they're spending less time. I know I am. And
I know that the media industry is definitely, clawing back at that, and using their voice to sort of like pinpoint all the issues that these platforms have created, right? There's no denying the fact that publications like the New York Times are purposely making sure that they cover every single bad piece of press around Facebook, Google, and any other big platform that has taken away their bread and butter.
Yeah, there's definitely they have a stake in seeing Facebook suffer 100%. But I also think it's one of those. It was about time, and it's a good thing that no one platform should have the corner on any industry. It's bad for the buyers. It's bad for the advertisers. It's bad for the audience. It's bad for everybody.
Yeah.
And the only one that it's good for is Facebook when they have the corner on it.
Yeah.
So I'm not sad to see that happen, and I'm also not sad. I wasn't sad to see Facebook come up and give Google a bit of a run for the money, because for a while there was the whole like dominance of Google's like it's all search SEM, and it's all Google too. So
yeah, I mean it's we're sort of seeing that like platforms are learning from the big guns and sort of like coming at them. Like again, like now these days, everybody's talking about Amazon, right? And Amazon is a big platform to sort of go after this type of money, and it's scaring them. It's scaring the big platforms.
So if you're not a retailer, if you're not selling something like to physically hold in your hand, Like how would you advertise on Amazon?
Well, I would say that's you probably wouldn't, but I'm saying there's a lot of businesses out there that
Right.
do care about online sales, right? And there's a big chunk of the industry there.
But there's also a lot of complaints from businesses. And what I find interesting, if we want to go into that direction, is what they call the DTC brands, right? The direct to consumer brands that are building their own platforms. And I really like seeing that, like, what is it, Brandless out of California, I think they are. And they're building their own audience on their own platform without the use of Amazon.
True. So to sort of like swing us back to the subject of the podcast,
What we called ourselves.
No, it's not just that. It's the idea of like tactics versus strategy, right? These platforms, what they're doing is sort of like they're selling us on the tactics only. They don't help us create a strategy. And yes, you can have a strategy on that tactic, but at the same time, you're still within that ecosystem, and you're sort of like
Let's say you could be
beholden to them.
strategic about that tactic, but I wouldn't say you could have a strategy. on that
Exactly.
tactic.
That's what I meant.
So
but at the
when
same
Google calls you
Yeah.
and says, we can help you with your strategy.
Yeah.
What they're really saying is,
they're helping you with with the tactic, being strategic.
well,
in
they're
their tactic.
helping you spend more money.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for
what-
sure.
they
Trust
don't-
me. I recently came with like a really big budget to Google, and they still told me, it's like, oh, you need more money.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, really?
I know. I always love it. Like you get an email from Google or Facebook, like, oh, we would love to talk and really help you with your strategy. And then you get on the phone with them or you sit down with them and they're all like, yeah, let's find you more ways to strategically open your wallet to us. It's like basically,
Yeah.
whose strategy are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that's and essentially we sort of want to sort of raise that awareness of, both from people in our industry and our clients when it comes to being strategic with these platforms is, it's not a all-in-one solution to build a brand, to build awareness online. And we definitely don't want to build those type of strategies where all we have to do is run ads on Facebook.
well, it's not a strategy. Like anybody who comes to us who says, oh, we need this, like, can you do that? We always say no. Like if it's like, oh, can you do, like, I like to say, we are not a content agency, but we do great content, and we're not a social media agency, but we do great social, and we're not a video marketing, but we do great video, is because we start with the audience and we find who the best customer is. It's something that we've been talking about for a while. We're formalizing that more in our rebrand is what we mean by your best customer. So writing and talking about that a little bit more. And what we mean is the customer who is who most needs or desires, has the biggest need or desire for what you're selling.
Yeah.
Can pay for it as willing to pay for, which is a big thing, what you're selling. And number 3, we really like to emphasize, and this is sort of like the social part of everything that we do, is that person talks to other people like them.
Yeah.
So if you're like selling to, I don't know, silent monks living on like a hilltop alone, it's you might be making products for them, but getting the word of mouth around is going to be a little tougher than if you're selling to somebody who talks to other people. So if you like small business customers that gather around and share information, so there are, of course, various different channels and tactics that are friendlier for each of those audiences. And that's where you find the strategy is saying, okay, who's my best customer? Where are they hanging out? What's keeping them up at night? What's their customer journey look like? Yeah. If your best customer is not online and is instead buying magazines, that will be your best channel and tactic, is to get into those magazines. If your best customer is online and is on Facebook all the time, sure, that's a great channel for you. And, you can create a strategy that will reach that audience. But you really need to know, first and foremost, who that customer is, where they're at, what they're thinking. You even craft the content so it speaks back to what they're thinking, what they're lying awake thinking, and how you can really help them and speak to them. So, an example that I give is, a client was selling a certain product that had a very technical term, but that's not ever what the customer would be searching for. The customer didn't even know that thing existed. And so would be searching to solve their problem. And their problem was, ABC. And so what you want to do is you want to, well, first of all, get in front of those searches, but also when you use the language, even in your posts and your ads and the homepage of your website, you want to speak to that thing that they're looking for. You don't want to describe the product first and foremost. You want to describe how you solve their problem. Yeah,
it's almost like that SEO technique of explaining stuff and bringing it to the simplest description, so that you get the people that are searching for that solution, as opposed to your technical term of calling it, right, and all that sort of stuff. So I definitely think that's very important. We're obviously a little frustrated at this tactical thinking, the way both brands are sold on it, and agencies fell for it, and now I think they're trying to claw it back and bring that value of the strategic thinking. Do we see signs that it's getting better, or do we think that all this sort of calamity with these platforms, both the bad press, the bad stuff happening on YouTube and Facebook and all that sort of stuff, as a sort of hint at, wait, hey, it's not as simple as the way you've been told by these platforms, right? Because they can't even handle their own stuff, right? So I do think that there's some sort of hope for
light at the end of the tunnel.
Light at the end of the tunnel, but also the expertise needed to understand the whole ecosystem, it has gotten way more advanced, right? I would always be a little miffed at when TV people would be transferred to become digital buyers. I was like, oh man, that's the worst thing to do. But you had no choice, because you have to keep those employees, but you have to shift them around. And whereas people who sort of have been doing the web for a while sort of get a lot of the big picture, right?
We don't want to say digital people know everything.
That's not at all.
Well, actually, but it's kind of true. Well, it's funny because we've, God love them, and they're amazing and they're brilliant and super talented. But we've been working with a lot of media and sort of the analog production people. They are brilliant, but sometimes I feel like we're speaking entirely different languages. Yeah. I'm like, well, why would we do that? Yeah. Well, because, there's the reasoning behind it's very big screen focused. Yeah. And the content that most people are consuming is very little tiny screen focused nowadays. Yeah. And so why would you spend all this time optimizing something for this big giant screen if 99% of the views are going to be in this little tiny screen? And it just seems like why that's it's taking the lion's share of time to think to do this stuff. And we're like, well, okay, we're already at point 10 miles down the road and you're still working on this thing so that you can optimize for the big screen for that potential time that somebody projects it to some big screen. Yeah. And we're 10 miles down the road doing a million different things because that's the way digital works.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's that thing where, you talk about people who have built brands online, they shoot stuff quick, they create content quick, they learn quick, and then they move on, and then they adjust and they adjust and they adjust. And whereas the traditional way of doing it is spending an exorbitant amount of time and budget into an idea that you have no idea is going to land or not. So obviously, once it's out, you need to spend a heck of a lot more money to make sure people see it, as opposed to optimizing it to find that audience, to tweak it to that audience who are going to see it no matter what, without as much, of a paid strategy behind it. That's our way of thinking versus the traditional way of thinking. So what's going to be the next steps in terms of, how strategy needs to be sort of put forward, as opposed to, taking some of that mind space away from the tactics, right? So
Well, first of all, so many people don't even understand what the word strategy means.
True.
Which is baffling and not baffling at the same time. Like people, somebody told me a story about a client the other day. I was like, oh my God, that sounds so familiar. They were talking to the potential client, and the potential client's like, well, we already have a strategy, so we just need you to build on that. And then, the client hires them, and they had priced out this whole project based on the fact that there was a strategy in place. Then they got in there, and like the strategy was like this 1-page thing, and it was really like a list of tactics. That was it. So she got in there and she was like, so where's your strategy? And they're like, that's it. And she was like, you don't have a strategy. Like, there's nothing to build on. Like, why would I build? They thought a strategy was a list of tactics. So we're going to do these 10 things. And you just need to build the content that goes on those 10 things or gets built around that. Yeah. And she was just like, I can't do anything with this. This is not a strategy, but it's not, that is so common. We've had clients in the past or potential clients say that, oh yeah, no, we hired a firm. We got it. We did a strategy. But then when you look at it, it's not like they might have we have a focus. Sometimes they'll have a focus, like this is the audience that we're going after, and usually that audience is way too broad or not defined, or there's still a lot of work to be done to understand who they are and where they're at and what's keeping them up at night. Or they'll say they have a strategy, and it's something like that. It's like a deck or a one-pager that has just a list of tactics and maybe a budget, if you're lucky. Like, here's what we want to spend on it. Or they'll have goals, but their goals will be completely out of line from what their budget is. Like, oh yeah, we want to get 1 million new customers in 3 months with $10,000, like that kind of thing. Or you're like, that's not a strategy. That's like a genie in a bottle, wishful thinking.
Yes.
So I think first and foremost, our next steps is going to be like really educating people on what it means to be strategic, to put together a strategy. And I think one of the biggest issues is people focus on the outcome. They focus on that plan, which is not a strategy. It's the sort of the step-by-step. It's the tactical steps you take to get that strategy to realization. The strategy is the thing that comes out of the research and insights, right? So the research and insights is that understanding your audience. I think it was Peter Drucker's famous quote that I love to go back to is the key to great marketing is to understand your customers so well that the product or whatever you put in front of them just sells itself, right? You speak to that customer, and that is a strategy. And of course, the strategy includes, solid goals, whatever they call SMART goals, like measurable and like actual goals and real goals, not like we need 1 billion impressions. Like that's not a goal. That's I don't know what that is. It means to an end or ends to the end. I don't know what it is, but it's not real. But you also have to be realistic. And I think that's the R part of SMART. And I should probably look up that acronym. It's like something measurable. Oh gosh, yeah, we'll look it up. But Carlos is looking up right now, so we can sound a lot smarter. But that's
specific, significant, measurable, meaningful, motivational, agreed upon.
That's smart. Just one smart.
Yeah, I know, but it's all the different versions.
Specific,
of it. And then realistic and time.
measurable. attainable. That's
Yeah.
a big thing. Realistic and and on a timeline. So that a strategy includes that. It includes who the audience is, how you're going to reach them, like in that overview, not in a very specific way, and why they would care, like why they are going to somehow come along, and see whatever you're doing and want to engage, and then has that measurable outcome at the end. And it's more than a statement, obviously, but I always think like the strategy part is when you're hiring somebody to put together a strategy, but you're like, oh, we don't spend all that time on research. It's like, well, you obviously don't want a strategy because you need the research.
Yeah.
That's what a strategy is. It's research.
Yeah.
And insights. And they go, aha, this is what you need to get to your goals.
Yeah, I think over the last many years, strategy and research has sort of been not emphasized, that nobody emphasizes. And I harken back to my days at big agencies. There was a research department, but it usually was one guy or two guys, actually not many women at the time. All they would do is crunch Nielsen numbers, right? Day and night. They would crunch Nielsen numbers for reports and things like that, right? Nobody would actually do the type of research that is necessary nowadays, where there's so much information out there. There's so many ways to find out research, and there's a lot of platforms to help you there, right? As opposed to before, where you had Nielsen, you had ComScore, right? They're still fighting their fight. As somebody who has a Nielsen tracker at home that's hardly being used, I've lost complete faith in the way that that system works. But it's been fascinating to see the
We're
value.
a Nielsen family.
Yeah, the value of research and sort of really pinpointing the power that digital offers, right? In terms of really pinpointing who your audience is, who they're listening to. They're not just watching the latest episode of Game of Thrones, right? That's not, that's a mass audience. It's not the type of clients.
Well, in most audiences, and that's where you need the research, is most audiences aren't mass audiences. There are very few products or even services that you could say, oh, well, that's for everybody, and it's can market to everybody equally. And if you think about most mass brands, they've built over a long period of time, or are legacy brands that have been around forever. And the reason they're mass is just familiarity with the mass. Like even Coca-Cola, which you would think, oh, that's a mass brand. Like not everybody, like there's a lot of people that don't have sugar, right? They don't drink sugar drinks. I don't ever drink sugar drinks. So that's why even Coke and Pepsi have like a whole bunch of different lines of products, because they have specific audiences for their specific
they have their
brands.
tentpole brands and everything else under it.
But even their temple isn't really even like, I wonder the market share that Coca-Cola has lost over time.
I'd have to look into that. I haven't looked into Coca-Cola for a very long time. How should we end this podcast, this return? What should be the lesson that we want to sort of leave everybody with in terms of how they should be thinking?
Well, I feel like this is a longer term conversation. We would love to have guests that could challenge our views, or definitely we can learn from in different areas, people that might have seen over the years a huge shift in strategy. Maybe remember back in the day when strategy was king or whatever, or maybe that we'll have great stories to share. So please do send us messages as to who those people could be.
Yeah, you can tweet at us at Truly Inc. on Twitter, or email us at podcast@trulyinc.com if you have any ideas and people we should be talking to and have on our podcast. So we end our return to podcasting. We hope that you enjoyed this discussion. We're doing our best to get back to a regular podcast scheduling. We had initially thought of like doing it every other week. I'm hoping we can keep doing that. and we'll be working towards that.
Yeah, I think we need to bring more people to just talk with us. I think that's going to be the key. So there's that. I also, I've been trying to keep my videos up, but we were trying to sort of align them with the video topics and kind of fell out of step with that. So there's definitely ways in which I have a whole series on community coming up.
Yep. We should have that discussion in the next one.
Yeah, I think there are some pretty cool people in community that I would love to have on the podcast as well. So
awesome. Have a good one.
Bye.